meetings. I go to civic and academic venues, and you can tell immediately when you come in. You get a feel for the passion, you get a feel for the dedication, you get a feel for your participation, I should say, every time I come here. I feel like I'm coming back home. I used to live right around the street when I lived in the Pentagons. I used to go to Our Lady of Lourdes, so this is my old neighborhood, so it's always nice to come home. And now we have a daughter working over here in the Taylor building, so you know this is a very familiar neighborhood. I thought it might be of interest, since we just finished up the London Olympics, if I could speak to you a little bit about this very, very unique situation and this unique event. I know unique is often overused, but I can honestly say between my government experience, my corporate experience, and working with nonprofits, it was a fascinating dynamic. And I thought I'd share a little bit of the planning and the behind the scenes with you so that you would see what really goes into a 2-week event that everybody gets to see. When I got out of the service in '93, one of my former supervisors called me, and he was already down in Atlanta. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to, retire, whatever it may be." So he said, "Well, why don't you come down here?" He said, "We're putting together an organizing committee for the Atlanta Olympics." And I think from a timeline point of view, I never had a full appreciation for what it takes just to get the bid. So I worked with them from '93 to '96. It takes 3 full years to plan that 2-week track meet, as we used to say. It was very eclectic from a lot of different views. I knew getting out of the service as an infantry guy, I never had to worry too much about resources and logistics and things like that. We had a lot of other folks that did that, and we always had the necessary resources to go forward and do the mission. So I figured this would be a great transitional assignment for me to learn program management, to learn about all the things that are required in any type of an operation, program management, etc. The fascinating thing is you're automatically on a timeline, and a very fast-moving timeline. It took 2 to 3 years to get the bid. So Billy Payne and A.D. Frazier were the 2 gentlemen who believed in Atlanta and getting the games. And that in itself takes a lot of time to prepare the city fathers for the IOC to come around and then make their selection. It is absolutely, I will tell you, win-win for the community, for the athletes, for the people that work on it. It's a fantastic event to really have in an organization a single focus. And each day when you would come to work down there and the Inform, which oversees Centennial Park, there would be a little clock. It would say, 428 days, and you come to work the next day, it's 427 days. So you were constantly on that 3-year planning. The second thing was the resources. It was mentioned here, I believe, a moment ago in one of the announcements. But if you can believe this or not, the budget for $1996 was $1.7 billion, almost $2 billion. Now, if you don't want to fall out of your seats, it's a 501c. Is this crazy? So when Price Waterhouse comes in 1996, after the closing events, the profit for the 1996 Olympics is $1. Is that something?
Was it
$1. So that amazed me after I got into government contracting and realized the enormity of how funds are raised. And here's how it works. When I got down there, they gave me the press operations because I had done that in the Army. I worked media relations and had familiarity with reporters and things like that, knew their culture, etc. So I said to myself, well, let's see. For 26 years now, you've worked with men and women who want to be all they can be. I'm working now with athletes who want to be all they can be. They're 18 to 25 years old, so that was easy. Because if you're going to be a spokesman, you got to believe in your institution. You have to believe in what it is. There's nothing better or more altruistic than to watch the sacrifice and dedication of these kids. The second thing is I knew the media, and they were a special interest media, like Sports Illustrated and ESPN, because they covered that. Well, I had worked with special interest media in the Pentagon. Theirs was military. So a lot of similarities. The challenge was staff. They raised money in 3 ways. You get it from television rights. At that time, it was $456 million from NBC. That comes first. And when you get a little money, then you can hire some people. The next way to sell is sponsors. So you have Coca-Cola and IBM and, you know, Harry's Athletic Supporter, and everybody gets in there to be a sponsor. So that comes second as you go down this timeline from 93 to 94 to 96. The third way is closest to the games, and that's tickets and T-shirts. That's the actual participation by people who will come to the games. So it sounds simplistic now, but those first couple of years, you get the NBC rights in there. And when I walked in, I had one person, Harris Bostic, a wonderful young man, African-American, had just come from the Peace Corps, went to Morehouse. Smartest guy I ever knew. Set up a monetary system for Ghana. I mean, you know, this is good for an infantry guy who's an English major. You know, I need Harris. So anyway, we walk in there, and by the time the games came, we went from Harris and I to 1,200 people in press operations. So while you're putting on this event, there's about 10 functional areas that you need to work with, coordinate with, and all. So we were press operations, then you had logistics, then you had transportation and security, the look of the games, you know, the branding, the mascots, food service, about 10 functional areas, the construction of 26 venues, all fascinating because they had to bring in staff for each one of those, and you start out small, and then as you get more money, you can hire a few more people. So it was fascinating to see all of these different functional areas and the expertise that they brought to one single event. And it is huge when you look at the number of athletes. The thing about the Olympics is whether it's London or Sydney or Atlanta, the Winter Games are going to be next, they're over in Russia. The thing about the games is they're very predictable, the summer games, as far as the variables and the constants. So the constants are you always have 10,000 athletes. You always have 197 countries. So you know those. The fans and all is to be determined depending upon attendance. You know, in London there were a couple of venues where they had to fill up the seats with some of the military people. The other variable, or constant I should say, is the journalists. On the print side, you always have 5,000 journalists. So that's a lot. It's a lot. When I was in the desert, I had 400. So when I went for the interview, the guy running the game said to me, he said, well, you know, Colonel, he said, you're in the desert. He said, you had 400 journalists over there in Riyadh. He said, we're going to have 5,000 journalists. I said, yes, sir, I understand that. Schwarzkopf gave me 2 weeks to get ready. You're giving me 3 years. I can do this. You know, so it was kind of fun to talk about the number of journalists. The thing that was fascinating with them is, though, is that they're international culture. So we talk about communications, and each culture communicates in a different way. So they may have some unanimity when it comes to sports and athletes and representing their particular man or woman from their games that represent their country. How they receive it and how you present information to them has to be all incorporated into a main press center. So that was 300,000 square feet. And we had to build out what was now the merchandise mart, the apparel mart. If you've ever been to Atlanta, down by the Marquis Marriott, there's a series of buildings that are joined by tubes. And so our main press center was on the bottom floor of that apparel mart. So that took a little bit of what we call pipe and drape. If you've been to any trade shows, you know what that is. It's just your space. And then we had to establish rate cards so that a small country might only have 4 or 5 journalists, whereas, you know, America or Sports Illustrated may have 200. So you had to divide up the space and provide them with a table and a chair and a fax machine and a phone and all the things and accoutrements that go into that particular space. So I really appreciated the experience. It helped me in a very short amount of time to learn a lot about resources, to learn a lot about CAD drawings, you know, which in '93 were kind of new, computer-assisted drawings. And you know, I'm more at home with Shakespeare and sonnets, so you know, I'm really having a ball down here with all the architecture. So as we moved along, of course, you're working your own lane, press operations or public information. But then necessarily, as you get bigger, you're working with different kinds of people. So the second variable was the staff. And you had 3 kinds of staff. You had those who I would call seasoned veterans. And it might be that Peter had just come from the World Cup and that Gary had just come from the Winter Olympics in Lillehammer, but their functional area was transportation. Well, these guys are experts. They've done World Cups, they've done Olympics. They know trucks and buses and things that go into that, and fuel and parking and all of those things. So those seasoned veterans were within each of the functional areas, and we had them in press operations as well, and they were a tremendous benefit because they had been there, they knew all the things that would impact on your functional area. The second group were folks like myself, folks who had an expertise in that particular function, whether it was logistics or venue management or whatever, construction, and they worked very good with the seasoned guys. The third group are what we call VIK or loaned executives. So let's say Gary is with Coca-Cola and he works for them and he has a certain functional expertise. Let's say it's IT. Well, Coke may be a sponsor at the gold level for $50 million. Well, they're not going to write a check to Billy Payne for $50 million. They're going to be some VIK, some value in kind. So what Coke does for 3 years is they have loaned executives. So they take Gary and Pete and Charlie and Priscilla, and they all come work for the games for 3 years, and the value of their salaries and benefits and bonus is part of that sponsorship. So I found the whole operation each day to be an onion that just kept, I kept going deeper and deeper and deeper as to how they pulled this dynamic together. In perspective, looking back, what I found was fascinating was how we all worked together. Different backgrounds, different expertise, coming from different places. I would get a minimum of 50 resumes, minimum, from probably 100 countries wanting to work in press ops, just press ops. Because for a youngster coming along, that was a very nice thing to have on your resume, that you had worked on a very, very large special event. So you had the international aspect to it as well. And I remember I had one young lady, she was just so smart. She had a degree in engineering, Maria Fernandez, and she was from Cuba. And to have the international aspect, to have the age, the generational contributions that were being made was just fantastic. But you had the single focus. As I say, we grew as we went along from a very small group of about 400 people till ultimately, for the whole, all 10 functions, and in our own little area from 2 to 3 to 1,200. As you get closer to the end, a lot of emphasis on public information. So after we had the media all set up, then I had a large telephone room, and people would call in on tickets and prices and venues, and do I really have to drive from Stone Mountain to downtown, et cetera, et cetera. And I was reminded when I read about London and all, just simply the geographic challenge that you have in a very small area. And so as I got to work the venues, not only did I have the main press center, but I had smaller press centers at the different venues. So for example, I had to go out to Savannah and to that part of town for, I think it was beach volleyball, then we had field hockey at one of the universities. But you had about 31 venues for 26 different sports. And each one of those were outside of downtown area, simply because of the people and the masses. I'll change tracks now and go on the media side of things. You have 5,000 accredited media. These are people who walk in and they have their tickets and they have a hotel room and they have, a pair of Nike shoes, and they're in good shape because they want to have favorable stories written about the organization and hosting of the games, if you will. So I kept tugging at the sleeve based on my media. I know the nature of the media a little bit. And I said, you really need to set up a non-rights center. You need to have a center for those journalists that are going to come that are not accredited. I said, because if they are outside the gate and they're not inside for the 100-meter dash with Carl Lewis, they're going to be writing stories about the garbage. They're going to be writing stories about bus and public transportation being interrupted for 2 weeks for the hardworking men and women who live in Atlanta who have to go to work. They're going to write about how do we launder all the sheets in the hotels. How do we handle? I said, I'm telling you, the non-rights folks, you better stroke them. You better have a little center for them so that the city fathers can come in and talk about how the city itself is opening its doors and welcoming all these people from around the world. 2 Olympics later, they have a non-rights center, and finally. But anyway, you bring up your suggestions. But it was a fascinating experience where I was able, in my own way, to bring what I had learned as a government communicator to a very, very special event. There's nothing like it. And if you've done one, it's an amazing experience because for those of us in the room that remember the movie, it's like Brigadoon. And after the final closing event, you went downstairs and there was an antique show right where my press center had been 24 hours before. It was amazing. And $1 on the table. So, fascinating experience. I know you're all busy people. That was my experience, and I'd be happy to take whatever questions you may have, either on the resourcing, the operation, the function, or the planning. But I really did find it to be very unique and one that I really enjoyed learning from. I learned a whole lot in that one experience there, and a lot of respect for a lot of people. Final footnote, a lot of former Olympians, older, were also part of our committee, and they're just wonderful. They bring to the workplace the same attitude, the same dedication that they had as athletes. We had people like Benita Fitzgerald, who won the women's javelin up in Montreal. One of my favorites was Willie Banks. Worked with him. He was the triple jump guy. And there's some wonderful chances, you know, as I look around this room, an opportunity for me to meet Olga Korbut, an opportunity to meet Al Order, you know, with the discus, and just the wonderful, wonderful people that you get to meet. Very uplifting experience. So, I know you're busy. I will take some questions, and they'll probably maybe help you in your organizational experiences. Yes?
Hi.
Yes, sir, please.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One is, they say that you can't sponsor an Olympics, like you'll never see an ad for Coke or Procter & Gamble or anything like that.
Yeah.
There are levels of, you know, sponsoring the Olympics or being partnering with the Olympics,
Yeah.
and then there are, you can sponsor the US team.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, it's a great question. You have gold, silver, gold, silver, bronze, different $1 million levels. The big ones, the heavy breathers, were the IBMs and the Coca-Colas, and below that was maybe Bausch Loan. So you had the locals and regionals. If you've ever been to Atlanta, Coca-Cola owns Atlanta. I mean, that is their corporate headquarters. Probably one of the most successful entities, brands, any way you want to approach it in the world. Anytime there was a briefing, or anytime there was a podium, or anytime there was anything, there was always a can of Coke right on the side, even though the rules weren't. And right at the last minute, they'd be putting on the lavalier, and they'd be getting the guy ready or the lady ready to speak, and all of a sudden his hand would come out, and bonk, there'd be a Coke. Unrelated to my topic, but I've had a chance to work with a lot of movies. I oversaw the Hollywood office when I was at the Pentagon. And even the media, even Coke is unbelievable, the way they come up with it. If you remember when Schwarzkopf was having his rather direct conversation with the other guys towards the end, in the tent and all that stuff, all the shots of Schwarzkopf and all the demands on, you know, Saddam Hussein's guys and all the rest of this stuff, all of a sudden a hand comes in and puts a Coke next to Schwarzkopf's plate, you know. So, I mean, they're amazing. You know, I'm looking for a Coke behind me here. You know, I know we had orange juice. But you can have sponsors. They don't want it to be an outrageous corporate sponsorship event, because that kind of takes away from the athletes. Some of us in the room can remember, you know, examples of when there was just literally no money involved. Poor Jim Thorpe, you know, in 1912, finally got his medals back, the greatest athlete that ever lived. I was amazed, I guess, a few years ago when we would take some great NBA players and come up with a basketball team, you know, obviously corporate. So I think the amateur status, the purity of that for the games and all, has in a very evolutionary way moved towards the corporate world. It takes a lot to put on the games, I mean, but there is tremendous sponsorship branding when you can say, we provided the electronics for the scoreboard, or we provided the shoes, and they're pretty good about it, but there's very subtle little Nike things on their uniforms and all. There was a big discussion about our kids wearing berets, and you know, it was made in a different country or whatever, designed by Ralph Lauren, or maybe came from somewhere. So the corporate folks really, we had a whole department just on corporate sponsorship and the, quote, look of the games, if you will. But the same is true of the Winter Olympics. I had the benefit of, in a learning process in '94, to go meet my counterpart at the Winter Games to see how he or she was running the press center over there in Norway. And that was a big thrill to, you know, see Kerrigan and Harding and all the rest of those folks over there. It's a beautiful country if you've not been to Norway. Very hardy folks, and it was just like Cinderella. It was majestic, a valley and the ski jumps and all this. Wonderful, wonderful setting. I guess Russia's the next one. They had the Olympics, Summer Olympics in '80, which is the only one we did not go to. Mr. Carter did not send a U.S. team. And they'll have the Winter Games. When I went to the Soviet Union in '91, when I was at the Pentagon, I saw their setup for the games, so I'm sure they'll dust off some of that and really give it a nice look. And then I think Rio de Janeiro is the next summer game, I believe. But it takes a whole lot of prep for it, but it's worth it. From a media point of view, the way they say it, you know, you got newspaper and you got photography and you got TV. They'll always say the TV gives you the spectacle. They give you the opening and the closing. The newspaper gives you the results. 100-yard dash, the discus, the shot put, whatever. But the photography, there's always one photo that you will remember. There's always one photo. Could be Bruce Jenner. Could be Mary Decker Slaney falling down when that little girl came by. There's always one photo that kind of grabs it. Could be Mary Lou Retton on the bar, you know, balance beam, whatever it may be. Another question. Sir, you have one? Did you have a question? No. Yes?
I have another one.
Sure.
If I remember correctly, there was an explosion at the Maldives.
Yeah, towards the end.
How did that affect your operations, press?
Okay. Well, you always have a what-if file. We have one in the Pentagon. We have one in the corporate world. You know, Pete would know, you know, for NPR, I used to be hit by a bus. You have a hit by a bus file. And, you know, that's really your succession plan. You know, what happens when, you know, who's next to take over. And a lot of the non-rights, remember, I kept saying, the accredited media will be inside the stadium. They'll be at field hockey. They'll be here. But the non-rights guys, where do they hang out? Centennial Park. Well, Centennial Park was right adjacent to the Georgia Dome and not far, a couple of blocks away from the Aquatic Center, which is where we had Georgia Tech. The Olympic athletes stayed in the dorms, and the benefit of legacy was they got the dorms when the games were over, which was very nice. So the city really received a lot of nice things. But we were probably about 4 days from the end. You know, you're tracking each day and everything's gone well when that incident occurred. And right away, from a media point of view, as you look back, I think there's quick rush to judgment. Let's get this thing, let's deal with it quickly and move on and keep the focus on the athletes, keep the focus on the games. And I think you then have the intersection of the federal authorities, the Atlanta police, all the things that go into jurisdiction that happens. And so there was some plans in place should something occur. It's like a murder in a small southern town. You know, the feds come in and say, I'll take it from here, you know, kind of, you know, in the heat of the night. So you had to have very, very good coordination, and they did, and they did. Unfortunately, the clock was, let's get to the end of the games, then we can deal with this event afterwards. And I think Mr. Pearl was exonerated, as I remember. But I guess the union, I'm thinking of the events in London, only one or two, a couple of doping things, but not really any big events that impacted security, a little bit of a hassle. But I think the contractor for security at the 11th hour, they had to bring in the military. Another important difference with America that I did not know, we have in our country, and you reflected in your Rotary, a spirit of volunteerism. So it's a given in America, you have volunteers. You see great movies like Witness, and you watch them, you know, help somebody put up a barn and whatever it may be. They don't have that in other countries. I didn't know that. So when you have Korea, Olympics or whatever, all the work is done by the military. When you get to London, all the work was done by the military. Some of these kids coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. I didn't know that. And it's uniquely American, the volunteerism. And so towards the end, we were able to have a lot of volunteers come help us in parking, things like that. I thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to come here, and I look forward to being with you again sometime. Thank you for everything you do.
Once again.
Oh, my pleasure.
And we give you our second
Covenant. This is one for me and the wife. Now we both have.
There you go.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.